You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In the summer of 2015, a family moved into what they thought would be their forever home, a quiet old farmhouse tucked deep in the Pennsylvania countryside. But hidden behind the walls was a secret no one could have predicted, one that would transform their dream into a nightmare. What started as a strange historical curiosity soon became something far more unsettling. Unexplained sounds, chilling drafts, and eerie whispers began to blur the line between reality and something darker. The family tried to push forward, but every attempt to restore normalcy only led them deeper into a story that feels ripped straight from a horror film. This is a slow burn, true account-style thriller that builds toward a shocking and unforgettable ending. If you love chilling, cinematic horror stories based on true events, subscribe to Soul Studios and turn on notifications. New nightmares arrive every week, and some endings change everything. Late one night in 2015, a panicked mother rushed her children into the car, glancing back at the dark windows of their old farmhouse. In the doorway, a tall silhouette stood unnaturally still, but no one was supposed to be inside. Moments earlier, her husband had staggered out bleeding and incoherent, whispering, "It's in the walls." What began as a dream home had become a waking nightmare. The horrifying discovery the family made during renovations months prior was only the beginning. And now, as the engine roared to life, she realized something was very, very wrong. The Dalton family, John, Mary, and their 2 young kids, moved into a 1930s farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania in early 2015. The house was a fixer-upper, and John eagerly started some renovations, including adding insulation to the drafty walls. One chilly afternoon, as he knocked through a section of drywall in an upstairs bedroom, he noticed a strange bundle fall out. Wrapped in a yellowed 1930s newspaper was the mummified carcass of a small animal. Startled, John tore open more of the wall and dozens of similar bundles tumbled out. Inside each, dead animal remains desiccated by time. The space between the studs was stuffed with them, along with old spices and personal items like a comb and a tarnished tin cup. The stench of decades-old decay billowed out, so foul that John gagged and stumbled back. Mary came running, and together they stared in revulsion at the pile of secret corpses now at their feet. "We were shocked, horrified, and disgusted," Mary would later recall to a reporter. The Dalton children were kept away from the room, but the whole family felt uneasy. Who would wall up dozens of dead animals and household objects inside their home? John notified the local authorities, who were just as perplexed. The local historical society sent an expert to examine the artifacts. After careful study, the expert delivered an explanation that was both fascinating and unsettling: powwow folk magic. The Daltons learned that in the early 20th century, some Pennsylvania Dutch families practiced a form of folk healing called powwowing, using charms and spells to treat illnesses. According to the expert, the former homeowner likely sealed these animals in the walls as part of a ritual meant to heal an ailment or ward off evil. It was folk magic that blended Christian prayer with older, pagan traditions. While much of powwow was benign healing, the expert warned, some rituals in that tradition veered into the occult. In fact, a few even involved darker spells like conjuring demons. Mary felt a chill hearing that. Conjuring demons in their house? John tried to reassure her. Surely this was just an old superstition taken too far. Perhaps the previous owner was desperate to cure a sick family member and performed this bizarre ritual as a remedy. The Daltons decided to remove the grotesque insulation from the walls and cleanse the house. Over several weeks, John painstakingly pulled out every carcass and artifact they could find, filling dozens of trash bags. They spent over $20,000 on professional cleaners and repairs, as well as mold remediation, since mold had grown on the rotting remains. The cleanup took a physical toll. Everyone in the family experienced headaches and coughs, and the kids developed rashes. The mold and stench lingering in the house even after cleaning caused frequent nausea and dizziness. The Daltons hoped that once the decaying remnants were gone, their charming old farmhouse would finally feel like home. Before sealing up the walls with fresh insulation, John also installed a state-of-the-art ventilation system to clear the air. By late spring 2015, the house was mostly back in order. They tried to put the gruesome discovery behind them, but something, it seemed, had already been unleashed. At first, it was little things. Unexplained cold drafts moved through the halls, even on warm May afternoons. The new insulation should have stopped those. The family's cat refused to enter the living room, hissing at empty corners. At night, Mary started waking up at 3:15 a.m. with a pounding heart, convinced she'd heard whispering. She would hold her breath in the dark bedroom, ears straining, nothing, except the rustle of leaves outside. It must have been her imagination. John, on the other hand, was plagued by an odor that wouldn't quit. No matter how many air purifiers or scented candles they used, he insisted the smell of rot still clung to the house. Mary and the kids smelled it only faintly, or only in certain spots. Notably the upstairs hallway where the largest cache of carcasses had been. John became almost obsessive, scrubbing the walls with bleach and tearing up sections of floorboards, looking for dead rats or source of the smell that only he perceived so strongly. Strange noises began echoing through the farmhouse at odd hours. There was a rhythmic tapping inside the walls, sometimes quick and loud as knuckles rapping on wood, other times a slow, irregular thump. When John opened sections of wall to investigate, he found nothing. No animals, no loose pipes. The house, though old, was built solidly. Sounds didn't carry easily between rooms, yet both John and Mary would hear a scratching or shuffling in the walls that seemed to follow them. On more than one occasion, they'd both stop what they were doing and look at each other, silently confirming that they each heard it. It was as if something was crawling inside the walls or trying to get out. The two children, 7-year-old Liam and 5-year-old Sophia, were not spared from the unsettling atmosphere. Usually boisterous, the kids grew quiet and anxious at home. Sophia started having nightmares and would crawl into her parents' bed nearly every night. Liam, who loved hide and seek, refused to play in the house anymore and took to wandering outside. When pressed, he admitted in a trembling voice, "I heard someone in the walls calling my name." Mary immediately froze when he said this. She had never discussed the whispers with the kids. The family tried to stay rational. The mold spores and stress were likely affecting their minds, John suggested. A doctor visit confirmed they all had mild respiratory issues, unsurprising given the exposure. They moved out for a week to live with Mary's parents while an environmental specialist fogged the house to kill any remaining mold. During that week away, the kids' nightmares stopped and everyone's mood lifted. They dared to hope the worst was over. After returning home in June, the Daltons decided to bless the house, just for peace of mind. They invited a local pastor to walk through and say some prayers in each room. The pastor, a gentle older man, carried a Bible and a small vial of holy water. As he sprinkled holy water in the hallway where the remains had been found, the lights abruptly flickered. The electrician later found no fault in the wiring. During a prayer in the cellar, a stack of boxes toppled over violently, startling everyone. The pastor maintained a calm smile, but left rather quickly after finishing the blessings, commenting to John in a low voice that the house had a heavy feeling. For a few days, the Daltons actually felt relief, a sense of calm as if the house itself exhaled. The eerie noises subsided. Mary slept through the night for the first time in months. They began to entertain friends again, trying to reclaim normalcy. Perhaps, they thought, the house was just a house after all, and their nerves had gotten the better of them. Then came July 1st, 2015, a date the Dalton family would never forget. It started like any hot summer night. The kids were in bed, and John stayed up late in the living room, researching in old newspapers and library archives about their house's history. Over the weeks, he had become almost obsessed with the past, determined to understand what had happened there. Mary, exhausted, had gone to bed. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic tick-tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. At approximately 12:30 a.m., Mary awoke to the sound of a muffled bang. She sat up, groggy, listening. It came again, from downstairs. She glanced at the bedside clock. The red digits read 12:44 a.m. It was louder and unmistakable, a door slamming shut. Mary's stomach flipped. She reached over to wake John, but he wasn't in bed. Heart pounding, Mary crept to the top of the stairs. In the faint glow from a nightlight, she could see the front door below standing wide open, swaying slightly. Another loud crash came from the living room. Mary's mind raced. Was it an intruder? Had John caught someone? She hurried down the stairs. As she reached the ground floor, Mary nearly screamed. The living room floor was covered in old newspaper sheets and animal bones. It looked as if all the cursed items they had painstakingly removed were back, strewn in a circle on the hardwood. In the center of the macabre spread stood John, rigid as a statue. He was facing the wall, his back to her. In his hand was a rusty hatchet, one they had found in an old shed out back when they moved in. He didn't seem to notice Mary. He was talking in a low voice to the wall, or rather to something inside the wall. Mary could barely breathe. She heard her husband hiss, "You want blood? Is this enough? Take it and leave my family." Before Mary could react, John suddenly raised the hatchet and swung it into his own left arm with a sickening thud. He gasped in pain, dropping the tool. Mary screamed and ran to him as he collapsed to his knees. Blood spattered the newspapers and bones. John was shaking, eyes unfocused as if in a trance. He choked out, "I'm sorry. I had to feed it, or it wouldn't stop." Mary snapped into action, kicking aside the brittle bones and wadded newspapers to drag John away from the wall. She yelled for her children upstairs. Miraculously, they hadn't woken. With trembling hands, she applied pressure to John's bleeding arm. He had a deep gash, but was still conscious, barely. Mary's eyes darted around the room in terror and confusion. Who was he talking to? The open front door suggested someone or something had been here, but she saw no one, only the eerie stillness of the night beyond the doorway. Then, from the wall right beside them, a rasping whisper rose up, hungry. Mary's blood ran cold. It was the same wall where most of the carcasses had been found. In the dim light, she noticed something on the wallpaper that hadn't been there before. A dark, spreading stain, oozing downwards. It looked almost like blood. Mary's survival instincts kicked in. She half-carried, half-dragged John toward the foyer, leaving the grisly living room behind. John was fading in and out of consciousness, his lips moving soundlessly now. Mary grabbed her keys from the side table. They needed to get out now. She ran upstairs, scooped a drowsy Sophia into her arms and ordered Liam to follow. The children, confused and scared by the urgency in their mother's voice, obeyed without a word. As Mary ushered them down the stairs, a series of deafening bangs erupted through the house. Doors slamming in rapid succession on the second floor, as if an unseen force was trying to herd them out. The air was filled with a guttural groaning sound that seemed to reverberate from the walls themselves. The children started crying. Mary's heart pounded wildly, but she kept moving, focusing on the front door that still stood open. Outside was safety. They burst out into the cool night. Mary hurried the kids into the car's back seat and laid John across the back with them, yelling for Liam to hold pressure on Dad's arm like she showed him. As Mary sprinted around to the driver's side, she glanced back at the house one last time. In the warm glow of the porch light, she could see the front door slowly creak towards closing. And in the narrow gap, just for a moment, she saw a figure, a tall, human-like shape standing in the doorway, its face in shadow. It did not move, even as the door slammed shut. A chill like death washed over Mary. She knew no living person could have been in there. She jumped into the car, started it, and peeled out of the driveway, gravel kicking up behind her. As they fled down the country road, the house's windows receded into the darkness. Only then did the groaning sound fade away. Mary drove straight to the nearest hospital, about 20 minutes away, continually checking the rearview mirror to make sure nothing was following. John survived his self-inflicted wound. The cut was deep, but thankfully not life-threatening. It missed major arteries. When hospital staff and police questioned him about what happened, John's memory was foggy. He claimed he awoke to find himself in the living room and thought he saw a shadowy figure taunting him. He said it felt like he wasn't in control of his own actions, as if influenced by someone else. Beyond that, he refused or was unable to elaborate. The authorities initially suspected a possible intruder, or that John had a psychological break. Mary, however, told investigators everything: the animals in the walls, the noises, the whispers, the things she saw in the doorway. She even showed them the living room, with the disturbing display of old artifacts and blood on the floor. By daylight, however, the scene inside had changed. The newspapers and bones were gone. The living room was tidy, aside from bloodstains, as if the night's chaos had erased itself. The police found no evidence of forced entry or of anyone else in the house. With no proof of a crime by an external party, it was concluded that John likely experienced an episode, possibly due to toxic mold exposure or acute stress, leading to a delusion and self-harm. The Dalton family, traumatized and exhausted, did not argue. They packed a few essentials and never returned to live in that house again. A month later, in August 2015, the Daltons' farmhouse was put up for sale. It remained vacant, a silent pariah of the neighborhood, as whispers circulated that it was haunted. In the process of preparing the house for listing, a worker made a final curious discovery. Tucked behind a loose brick in the basement foundation was an old leather-bound diary. It belonged to the home's original owner, a German immigrant farmer named Ernst Hummel, and the last entry was dated October 13, 1945. The contents of that diary were deeply disturbing. As Mary later learned, the realtor shared a scanned copy with them. Ernst Hummel wrote of his young daughter falling gravely ill in the winter of 1945 with a mysterious wasting sickness doctors couldn't cure. In his desperation, Hummel turned to an old family tradition of Braucherei, powwow magic. The early entries describe benign rituals and prayers he performed to heal her. But when these failed and the girl's condition worsened, Hummel's writings became erratic. He spoke of consulting a wandering powwow practitioner who taught him darker arts that could bargain with a spirit to save a life. In late entries, Hummel referred to that spirit as der Gefräßige, German for the voracious, or the devourer. He wrote that he made a pact with it. He would seal animal offerings in the walls to feed it, and in return the entity would spare his child. The final pages were nearly illegible, but one line stood out starkly, scrawled in trembling hand. "I have unleashed a demon and walled it in. God forgive me." Ernst Hummel's daughter recovered from her illness, according to town records, but Hummel himself died suddenly in late 1945. Neighbors at the time said he had gone mad. One account claimed he was found in the parlor, dead from self-inflicted wounds, surrounded by slaughtered animals. It was written off as a gruesome suicide during a fit of insanity. Reading this, Mary and John felt the blood drain from their faces. The parallels were chilling. John's inexplicable compulsion to injure himself, the animals in the walls, the shadowy figure. Had history repeated itself in their home? Or was it simply that John's mind, subconsciously aware of the story, imitated it under duress? But they had not known the full story until now. In fact, no one alive in town really knew it. The diary had been hidden for 70 years. The Dalton family moved states away to start fresh, but what happened in that farmhouse still haunts them. They consented to have the story told, anonymizing their name as a warning. The house, locals say, remains empty. Some nights, passers-by still report seeing lights flicker on and off in the vacant home, or a silhouette in an upper window. Others claim the property is perfectly serene now that the hungry spirit is appeased once more. No one knows for sure. The Dalton children, thankfully, recovered after leaving and barely remember the worst night. though Liam retains one eerie memory he shared years later. Sometimes I still dream about it, a voice in the walls saying it was hungry. Was the Dalton family tormented by a literal demon bound to an old powwow ritual? Or were they victims of a potent mix of toxic exposure and suggestible imaginations, replaying an old tragedy in their minds? The truth may never be fully known, but one thing is certain. If you ever find strange things sealed behind your walls, you might want to think twice before pulling them out. Some walls were meant to stay closed. The Dalton family never set foot in that farmhouse again, but the memory of that night still follows them. A whisper in the dark, a shadow in the corner of their minds. Whether it was the product of old folk magic or something far older and hungrier, they'll never truly know. When the past is sealed in the walls, breaking them open might break you.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained, and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.